So what was it about the lights that prompted you to focus on them a little bit more than you would do, say, were it were an aircraft?
I'd say three things really. Basically it was the brightness of the lights. Landing lights have rays, which, like a car light, you can see them pointing forward. There's no rays, just two bright lights. They were close together, which again to me ruled out military aircraft, because military aircraft, from my experience, do not fly in formation at night time for safety reasons. And secondly, the lights were staggered. They weren't parallel. They had one above the other, close together, which would indicate to me two craft flying very close together.
Did either of you hear any noise at all?
None whatsoever. And I've got quite sharp hearing.
Now the reason for that is, I think, if they were making a humming noise, we have the motorway just on the top of the hill, which is a constant humming noise. And that time of night, of course, there's a lot of traffic around. We have the Bradford Road down here too, so there's noise from both directions. That may have eliminated any noise that was there.
Now, you've mentioned that the flight of these lights was staggered. They have this intensity about them without giving off a beam. Was there any other curious feature that distinguished them from, say, normal aircraft?
The thing that impressed us most is the fact it was so intensely dark. There's no reflection from them. There's no possibility of getting it a shape, a distinction. But I definitely think there's two craft.
It was a strange one, mainly because it was such a clear evening. There was no clouds in the sky at all. There's obviously quite a few planes that travel over here, but they were just very slow moving. They didn't move around at all. They stuck together all the time, and it was just so strange watching them, how slow they were moving across. It was as if they weren't moving, if you know what I mean. It was just sort of like travelling so slowly, and they just never fluctuated away from each other. They always stayed tight, you know, the same distance apart, and just were just moving, and it was quite weird just watching them. Really, you could tell that weren't aircraft lights, as what I know anyway. I'm not very good at telling the distance or anything like that, but I would say they were quite low down, but they were certainly behind the towers. They weren't directly above, because I could still see them as I was travelling up, although I was straining behind rather than looking straight backwards, if you know what I mean. I wasn't sort of like looking just straight at the side. I was having to turn my back and see them, and then it was just as if they disappeared. I didn't see them move away, and I didn't see them sort of like just disappear. They actually just moved away, and then I think it must have been that my sighting was gone then, really. I had a look when I got right to the top of Cherwell, because you see quite a good distance across, and I didn't see anything after that.
But you're fairly convinced that they weren't your standard lights attached to an aircraft?
Oh, definitely. I would say quite 99.9% certain they weren't actually lights attached to a normal everyday craft. Certainly not.
We were coming home from the vets. It must have been about, his appointment was 5:30, so it must have been about 5:40, 5:45. Coming up Tinshill Lane, and we just happened to look across our right shoulder, and I said to Charlotte, I said, oh gosh, that's low, it's going to crash. But then as these lights got closer, it couldn't possibly have been a plane. They were too close together, too big. The best way I described them were glaring headlights, but big in the sky, not very just above house level, too low to have been a plane. So I said to Charlotte, I said, oh, it's aliens, Charlotte, you know, so which she grabbed my arm and says, oh, don't, Mum, you know.
How old is your daughter?
She's 13. But I said, oh, wave to them, you know, they're only friendly, like, so we were waving and having a laugh. And we watched them go across, extremely slow. Couldn't see anything else or hear anything. Just big white glaring like headlamps, like I said. Just went across, and then we carried on walking, and as we glanced then across our left shoulder, I couldn't see them anymore. They'd disappeared, and it was a bit eerie.
22 seconds was all the time I had to video it. But having said that, I mean, probably, maybe, yes, I did see them for a minute and a half or so. But we are somewhat restricted here with the the elevations of the houses and the trees.
Yeah, we can actually hear an aircraft going overhead right now.
That's right. Over there it is.
Yes. Now, you are familiar, I would take it, with normal aircraft that come into Leeds Bradford Airport.
Yeah.
Have you ever, or your wife ever, seen any lights like this before?
Never. If I had done, I wouldn't have bothered getting the video camera out. It was because it didn't fit into any pattern that we got the video camera out. I could see the strobe lights because I'm looking through the video on magnification, but I didn't see any strobe lights as they were approaching. So the only time I've seen them is on magnification on the film. You should be getting exactly the same sort of background noise as we were getting. But when I listened to the tape afterwards myself, there is a Doppler effect on it. You can hear it actually going away. So it's got to be something associated with those two objects, whatever they were.
I suppose it's increasingly we began to question what it was. We're saying, are there a couple of stars we've never noticed before and things like that.
Joe, whereabouts were you?
We were out walking the dog out on Roundy Golf Course. So we walked sort of down one fairway, up the other fairway, back down the original fairway, and these lights were still there. I can only describe them, you know, if you're standing in front of a plane as it's coming into land and you've got like plane headlights, and it looked like that, but they just never moved, absolutely still for at least 5 minutes.
And whilst we said they were stationary for all that time, as we got closer and closer, they suddenly moved, and they were one behind the other at that time, rather than side by side. But when they were moving, one in front of the other, and again, I've not seen aircraft like that. They're normally side by side as they move. They also, I mean, the speed they go across the sky as well was surprising, you know. I mean, no noise, or very, very faint noise. So, you know, the only thing you could liken the lights to is like when you see a helicopter hovering, but then there were two of them and they suddenly moved at a speed that a helicopter didn't move on. No helicopter I've ever seen.
What you're basically saying is that these lights separated.
They did. They started, as Steve said, when they started to move, they came almost over the top of our heads, one in front of the other, and as they passed over us, one of them carried on straight ahead and one of them went almost at right angles off left to the first one, very quickly.
When you say very quickly, have you got any idea at all to draw a comparison?
You can't put a speed on it. I mean, I'm not technically minded enough to put an actual speed on it, but we've all watched aircraft move across the sky, and they seem to be moving very slowly, don't they, when they move across the big horizon. These went from where we were, one went in the direction of Harrogate and one went in the direction of Garforth, and in seconds almost they were on the horizon in different directions. Now that's quicker than I've ever seen anything move. All I can say for certain is it's nothing I've ever seen before and nothing that I can explain. I mean, I think if you are a skeptic, you try to explain it to yourself, and I'm saying, well, there was some conflict in Iraq stirring up again, you know, is it some sort of stealth fighter or something? But the way it split from almost, it looked like one thing to two suddenly, I can't explain it. So I think people have to draw their own conclusions. I won't be sceptical anymore, I don't think.
Joe?
I wouldn't have a clue what it is. I mean, we've seen the traffic helicopter and the light from that regularly. The noise with that, it just wasn't that. And I've seen reports that suggest it was microlights, and I've also heard microlights, and it certainly wasn't microlights. Wouldn't like to say.
So we see a lot of lights at night, which are usually sort of civilian aircraft or commercial jets, and a lot of military craft as well. And of course we don't bat an eyelid, but on this particular occasion we did. It ended up being lasting about 3 minutes, with an object appearing over the horizon in the distance. There were two white lights with a fair distance separating them, which seemed to be hovering on the horizon. And so because they maintained that position for quite a while, I decided to get my binoculars out. And they seemed to appear at a very slow rate and ever so slightly get bigger, but all of a sudden a red light appeared, and at this point I was looking through binoculars, and this red light slowly began to rise above and between the other two lights to form a triangle, and at this point the whole object had got quite a lot bigger and had begun to turn, and as it tilted, this third red light actually rotated with all the other two, as if they were on fixed points on a triangle, and then they eventually kind of levelled out and it disappeared back almost the way it came.